today, which means we're in a hurry. But before I move on to our final works, let me pose a question that ties a number of these works together. Why would animals have loomed so large in early art? Well, I hope you had a chance to brainstorm a little. I have a few ideas. Animals would have been both familiar and frightening, necessary to survival and threatening to survival. Our encounters with animals are now pretty tame. Pet dogs, zoo polar bears, meat wrapped in plastic. But hunting, herding, and hoping not to become dinner would have been much more central to Paleolithic and Neolithic people's lives. Interestingly, the symbolic use of animals returns in a big way for our last unit, Global Contemporary Art. So here's a work we won't encounter again until late spring. What message do you think the artist is trying to send? What seems to be the meaning of this work? Well, she also seems to be suggesting that women can tame the predator and wolves, maybe men too. So why is the woman naked in this drawing? Is she deliberately exposing her vulnerability to the wolf? Is the woman showing she's not a threat? Is the artist suggesting that women are especially vulnerable? Now, and here's an important warning. I want you to pay attention. I said this in class as well. And note that I'm about to ignore my own advice. The College Board graders will not want you to express a personal opinion in your essays. They assume that all of these images are excellent works of art suitable for in-depth analysis. Don't waste words or irritate your graders by explaining why you like or don't like a work, although, and I realize this can be a subtle distinction, you do want to talk about how an artist uses techniques that elicit a response from an audience. So, now I invite you to break the rule, but only in class. What do you think of this work? Okay, I'll take a turn. I find this drawing irritating, mostly because I find it insulting to wolves and maybe to women as well. Wolves are sleek, elegant, deadly predators. They are not cuddly. And women who choose to cuddle up with wolves, I'd say they're pretty dumb. I prefer my women smart and maybe, when necessary, as deadly as the wolves. Give me Judith cradling a severed head any day. So I didn't know this work before it showed up on the College Board required images list. I expected to discover that the artist was delivering some kind of environmental message. Too many cans in landfills or something like that, and I was entirely wrong. Pisupo, it turns out, is how Samoans refer to canned goods. The former Chief Justice Samoa wrote that, and I quote, "When Samoans were first introduced to the wonder of tinned, that is canned food, this was in the form of pea soup. As no Samoan word can end in a consonant, they tacked on an O and made the Samoan form of the English term pisupo. As time wore on and other edible matter arrived in cans, the generic term pisupo was used for all of it. Now, it is more or less confined to tinned, that is canned meat." I'll continue to quote from a reading you'll be assigned in the spring. Quote, "It turns out that for decades, pisupo has been a prestige food item, eaten and handed out as gifts at feasts, weddings, funerals, and other special occasions in Samoan society. In this work, New Zealand artist Michael Tuffery comments on how an imported product has replaced local Pacific Island foods used in feasts and gift-giving. Through this work, Tuffery, who's an artist of Pacific descent, asks questions about the effects of colonial economies on Pacific peoples and whether foreign intervention actually encourages independence or fosters dependence. So who'd have thunk it? Well, I've left out a lot of other animals we'll encounter in the course, but we will encounter even more images of the male and female form. So I was a little surprised that this work didn't show up on the College Board list, since this is a very famous little lady. It's a small figure carved from stone, and it's about 30,000 years old, which makes the Venus one of the oldest works of art that we possess. She is tiny. Our AP Government and Seminar teacher, Dave Hauser, saw her in Vienna and shared this photo with me. Ask him about meeting her in person. So here are some more works that aren't on the list. Note the terms subtractive and additive, which are important vocabulary terms that you'll encounter again next unit. Additive sculptures are built up from a material, so statues made of clay or cast bronze or welded steel are examples of additive sculpture. And in fact, the Venus on the right is the oldest ceramic sculpture ever found so far. Subtractive sculptures are made by whittling down a material, stone or wood in particular. marble, of course, which is stone. You should be prepared to identify the sculptures in this unit as additive or subtractive. But what really intrigues me is how cultures so far apart geographically, and presumably without contact, created such similar and bizarre sculptures. Any thoughts about this? Well, before I share my own thoughts, let me finally turn to one of the unit's required works. What similarities do you notice between our two Venuses and the lady from Tlatilco? Well, all of these women are well endowed, especially around the hips, although our Mexican figurine wears a smaller bra size. Archaeologists speculate that female figurines such as these had some connection with fertility, human, agricultural, or both. The Venus of Willendorf and the Tlatilco figures also have highly elaborate hairdos. Why? We don't know. That it's quite likely it implies high status or perhaps association with the gods. We do know that crafting these complicated doos required meticulous craftsmanship, especially since the figures are quite small. In other words, these works were important to the artist and to the cultures for which they were created, worth the time and the skill involved in creating them. But of course, what really strikes us about the Tlatilco figure is that she has two faces. Why? Again, we don't know. One doctor theorizes that people in the region may have seen babies born with an unusual form of birth defect, conjoined twins with split or shared faces. A more common theory holds that the two faces reflect a spiritual system based on duality: good versus evil, earth versus heavens, day versus night. Similar figurines have been found not only in tombs but in open fields. They may have been sown or ritually buried in the four corners of cornfields, again suggesting a possible connection with fertility. Here are a few more figurines from the same site, including a double-headed, although not double-faced figure. The artists of this culture also produced so-called duality masks, such as the one you see in the left bottom corner. Like the carved camelid sacrum, these may have been used as masks in shamanistic rituals. This mask suggests the contrast between the living and the dead. Certainly the right-hand side appears to be a skeleton with a gaping eye socket. On a more cheerful note, I especially love the woman with the dog, which strikes me as having an intimacy that speaks to us across the centuries. But you know I really love dogs, right? We have a replica of this statue on the mantle of our fireplace. So here we see another of the unit's required works. What does anthropomorphic mean? It means imitating a human, although not necessarily human itself. I find this title a little puzzling, since it seems pretty clear that these were grave markers, and surely the symbols carved into the stone on the left, at least, are meant to convey some information about the person buried beneath. So what do they suggest? Well, it looks to me like he's wearing a dagger and maybe a breastplate as well. So, a warrior? Why do the readings make such a big deal over the display of human, that is, anthropomorphic, images from Saudi Arabia? Well, Saudi Arabia is the epicenter of Islam, and the Muslim religion forbids the depiction of any sentient being, human or animal or god, in art. But of course, Islam was 4 millennia away when these works were created. So how does the artist use line to convey meaning? We've talked about the information that the spare design may convey, but note too that the stela has vertical lines to convey strength, horizontal lines to convey stability, rootedness, and finally diagonal lines for drama. The composition is very spare and the face is highly stylized, yet both of these images, to my mind, capture strong emotion. The guy on the right, not the required work, communicates extraordinary sorrow with just a few carved lines. This was a talented artist. And since we were talking about the use of line, note the similarly styled geometrical faces on the lapida fragment as well. So what kind of faces do we find on the extraordinary piece from China? These faces appear to be derived from a combination of man-like figure and a mysterious beast. Although the jade Kong is meticulously crafted, it is still a Neolithic work without a written history. So theories about what its shapes and faces mean are conjecture, based on similarities to later Chinese works that might or might not carry the same meaning. We know that Kongs were found in large numbers in graves of persons of high rank, which does suggest some connection to ritual. Some Kongs show signs of having been intentionally burned, maybe intentionally broken, which might suggest that they were used in sacrifice. They were also found with bidiscs. You see a picture here. Those were also carved of very hard jade, so hard that it cannot be cut. It can only be abraded or rubbed down with sand. Khan Academy, by the way, has a good short video about this process, and believe it or not, I did not assign it. But I'm putting the video on Moodle in the little something extra category. For now, you should know that jade had great significance to the Chinese and other cultures. Its hardness represented durability. Its color variations were seen as subtly beautiful. The square shape of the Kong may symbolize the four corners of the earth, while the central cylinder, like the round bai, may symbolize the heavens. We'll return to these images later this semester when we look at other examples of Chinese art. But for now, I want to move to our last required work of the unit, Stonehenge. Now, vocabulary is easier if you learn a few Greek and Latin roots. Lith means stone. Mega, as I think you probably know, means huge. So a megalith is, yep, a very big stone, and a menhir is a very large, standing big stone. We will encounter post and lintel construction again. Stonehenge offers an especially clear example, so I wanted to label it. These words are found in your vocabulary list. Stonehenge is by no means the only circular stone monument found in Paleolithic Europe. Watch the first minute or so of this video to see several other examples. The video and readings we assigned suggested at least two probably related purposes or functions of Stonehenge. But since this is a Neolithic work, altogether now we don't really know. But what were those suggested purposes? Well, one was almost certainly to serve as a kind of astronomical observatory. We know that the sunrise of the midsummer solstice is exactly framed by the end of the horseshoe of trilithons at the interior of the monument, and that the sun hits at exactly the opposite point at the center of the bend of the horseshoe at the midwinter solstice sunset. We also know that a number of bodies have been found buried or cremated at Stonehenge, possibly positioned in directions that lined up with Stonehenge's astronomical points. Recent scholarship on Stonehenge has focused more on its use as a ritual burial site, and even possibly a site where human sacrifices were staged. So let's watch one more Stonehenge video. Okay, you may need to stop here. It's a short day, but if you have time, I'd like to end this unit with a work that will show up in our final unit and frequently shows up on the AP Art History exam. So let's assume we are space archaeologists from Alpha Centauri's only inhabitable planet, and we come across the mysterious remains of this artwork, or at least of this photo. So what is the function, content, context, and form of this work? Any guesses? We find another photo. Does this help? Where are we? Well, that's Central Park, New York City. The tall building suggests that we're in the 20th or 21st centuries, right? Does this photograph change or add to your guess about the content or function of this work? Well, now that you know the title of the work and a little more about the context, can you expand on your guesses? This artwork actually sparked a great deal of public controversy. Many critics and New Yorkers loved it. Many others did not. The quotation on this slide comes from a question and answer session with the artist. Due to space constraints, I've just posted their answers. The fundamental question, however, is the one we began with. The same question the judge asked in the case involving Bird in Space. Is this art? Is a temporary installation, which cost millions of dollars to erect and then disassemble, art? So how do the artists answer? Try to restate what they say in your own words. Now, so here's what a critic has to say. Why does this critic question the gate's value as art? Again, try to restate these complaints in your own words. What do you think? Do the artist and the critic have similar or different visions of the function of art? Well, again, you probably don't have time left, but should you have some, take time to talk about the similarities and differences between these works in terms of our Big Four. After your first unit test, we will move on to the ancient Near East and back to monumental works made of stone and mud, not of orange cloth.